District Facebook page. The vision for this district is Sumter School District is committed to educating, empowering, and enriching the lives of all students to reach their full. The mission, Sumter School District is committed to providing a safe, nurturing, and high-quality educational environment that supports diversity and equips students for local and global success. Tonight, we have present with us the Vice Chair, Esquire, Disney, Area 9, Shanti, Matthew McLeod, Area 6, Sherry Smith, Area 7, Jeff Zell, Area 8, Denise Jones, Shore Air Force Base Representative, and I suspect Ms. Tara Kaiser Johnson, Area 4, will join us shortly. I'm Ralph Canty, Chair, and I'm from Area 3. It's a pleasure to have each of you join us tonight. We're delighted to have some of our superlative students with us, and they are yet another indication of who we are as a district and what we can become as we commit ourselves to quality and excellence. Welcome. God bless you all as you come tonight. The meeting is now called to order and is open. The agenda, if there are no objections, the agenda will stand approved. Objections once, twice, 3 times. Approved, okay? Special presentations, 3.1, Office of Academics.
Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Trustees, this will be night number 2 of 3 nights in which we are presenting to you and honoring another group of students at our high schools, all 3 high schools, who have achieved a perfect score on their end of course tests. Tonight's students are English 2 students. Of course, we know that English 2 students requires a great deal of thought and interaction, and these students have achieved the very highest score that they can get. So at this time, I have Dr. Jade McLeod and Dr. Lamont Moore that will be presenting.
Good evening, board members. We're going to call them out by high school, and we're excited to recognize the students once again for receiving a perfect score on the Fall 2022 English 2 End of Course State Assessment. So our first recipient tonight is Miss Angelina Bennett. Next, we have Ms. Danica Dempsey. Gabrielle Garrison. Sanaa her Rehnquist. Christopher Hess. Riley Lewis. Elizabeth Taylor. And Maverick Williams. And that concludes Crestwood High School. At Lakewood High School, we had one recipient, Riley Wieringa. Riley Wieringa. Riley may not be with us tonight, but we can have a round of applause. That concludes Lakewood High School. And moving on to Sumter High School, Zia Apaliska. Brianna Beltran. Robert Chapman. William Davis. Loydana Fagon. Catherine Fair. Rhiannon Green. Savannah Hatfield. Jada Hilton. Arden Johnston. Larissa Kennedy. Jason Lee. Caitlin Mikowski. Benjamin Knock. And Matthew Reagan. And this concludes Sumter High School.
Thank you. Go get that update.
Let's celebrate these young folk again. This is exceptional. Let's celebrate them.
Got a couple more.
Oh, got a few more. Oh, I'm
We have
sorry.
Caitlin Cobb from Sumter High School.
Okay, I'm sorry. Item 4, executive session. We'll need a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move we go into executive session.
Mr. Chair, I second that motion.
For what purpose? I need you to read the whole item.
Okay, I move that we go into executive session for receipt of legal advice as it relates to the Board of Trustees meetings.
Support it. Support it.
That motion, sir.
Thank you. It's motion and seconded that we will go into executive session for the purpose of receiving legal advice. Those of you who support the motion will indicate so, please. It's unanimous. Ladies and gentlemen, this will not be a long meeting. It's a short meeting, so please don't leave. We'll be back before long, okay? All right, very good. Thank you very much. All right. Huh? I don't. 6:1, announcements? Any announcements? If there are no announcements, we'll move on to 6.2.
Mr. Chair, point of privilege, I would like to talk about a couple of things. As we speak tonight, our Sumter High School girls basketball team is competing over in Florence for the rights to have the superintendent travel to Aiken Saturday for the state championship. So when our young ladies are successful tonight, they will be competing in the state championship Saturday at 5:30. We already know that our Crestwood High School boys basketball team will be competing at the University of South Carolina at Aiken for the state championship on Friday at 2 o'clock. So I will have on a purple polo yelling from the stands Saturday.
All right.
That's my announcement.
Well, congratulations to both teams. All right. 6.2 board core values. We have a vision statement which says where we're going, what we're trying to become, what we are attempting to do. We have a mission statement which says what we are about, what our purpose is, what we're doing. But as an institution, we do not have core values. We have never done a statement on core values. And it came to my attention, as it probably came to your attention at the session last week when one of the speakers asked, what are the core values for your district? And I said to myself, we have no core values. We have never, ever identified our core values. So I do want to ask us as a board and as an administration to look seriously at 4, 5, or 6 principles that we can all embrace and believe that those principles define what we are as a district. Things like commitment and excellence and honesty and integrity, things of that sort. So I'm going to ask you to think about it tonight, and if you would submit your suggestion or suggestions to Ms. Scott, we'll compile them and we'll come up come up with a method for refining them, and then we'll ratify them at some future meeting. Is that okay? Anybody opposed to that?
Is there a deadline, Mr. Chair?
The deadline on the submissions, yeah, you know what? I'd like for it to be the 12th of March. When do you get married, on the 10th? I know I'd like for it to be on the 11th of March, the day after you get married.
I think we can arrange for it to happen before.
No, but we are happy about you getting married. We're happy about you and your love life, okay?
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, but we'll use that date. We'll use that date. Yes, yes, ma'am. Okay. So if each of you would submit at least one principal, I'm sure we will end up with the same in some cases, and then we can merge that and establish something. And then I'm going to suggest, once we do that, is that we send it over to the policies committee to look at in a final form, because the policies committee might want to add a little definition to each one. I'm not saying you will, but I think the policy committee should probably look at that before it's in a final form. Is that all right? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, we're to the superintendent's report. 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, 7.5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Trustees as well. We have 5 different reports tonight. Various members of the executive team will be presenting. We will start with the Office of Academics and our Executive Director, Dr. McLeod, if she'll come forth at this time. We will have her do 7.1 and 7.2. 7.3 will be done by a tag team of our Chief of Schools, Dr. Shirley Gamble and Mr. Sam Myers. And Mr. Inhabitant, are you a part of that as well? Okay, all right, so those two. All right, and then 7.4 will be, 7.4, 7.5 will be done by Mrs. Shatika Spearman, our Chief Finance Officer. Dr. McLeod.
Okay, good evening. I am before you this evening to bring forward the annual South Carolina Homeschool Enrollment Survey. This survey is completed every year at this time. Parents that participate in homeschool, they have until January 30th of each year to provide their enrollment information to the district, and then the district compiles that information and forwards it to the State Department. Parents have 3 different options for homeschooling in the state of South Carolina. The first option is under the auspice of the district and the board, and this year we do not have any that have requested homeschooling under that option. We have in previous years, but at this time we do not have any parents that are participating in option 1. Option 2 is the South Carolina Association of Independent Home Schools. That is a state association for homeschooling, and we do have students participating in option 2. We actually have 11 this year, 4 kindergartners, 2 second graders, 5th grader, 2 ninth graders, and an 11th grader. Then we have option 3, which is more of a local homeschool situation where local associations gather together, and there has to be at least 50 members to participate in those. So if you see the copy of your report, we have those entities listed and how many students they have at each grade level. So for the 22-23 South Carolina Homeschool Enrollment Survey, we currently have 611 students participating in homeschool activities. Last year, we had a total of 572, and the 2021 school year, we had a total of 640. Many times when I have been providing this information for the board, they have also asked about our local private and charter schools, so I also included that information for you. This is for the 22-23 school year, and it reflects the withdrawals out of our school district for this current school year, which totals 254. Are there any questions concerning the homeschool?
I have a question, Mr. Chair, just a quick question. Is this more or less, the 254 private school children, is this more or less than previous years? What's the trajectory? Is it growing? Is it receding as far as enrollments in the private schools or disenrollments in public schools?
It's trending pretty fairly the same over the last couple of years.
Is that up or down?
It's pretty stable.
The 254 represents what?
Students that have withdrawn from our school system this school year to attend either one of our local private schools or charter schools.
I don't know if my question deals with the numbers or not, but do we allow homeschool children to participate in the public school athletic program?
Yes.
Okay, then do you know how many of these homeschoolers are participating in public school activities?
Not off the top of my head, but we could get that information. In the state of South Carolina, we have by law to provide those opportunities. Now, they are after-school opportunities. They are not core classes during the school year. So, for example, if someone wants to participate in the marching band after hours, that's perfectly fine. However, they can't be in the band class during the school day.
However, if that band happens to be going to a contest, are they allowed to ride our buses?
Yes, ma'am.
And are they allowed all of the privileges as all of those students would be? And
Yes,
does
ma'am.
this also include, for example, if we have an after-school program with tag or something like that, and it's not something done within school hours, it's like the children who have opportunities for dance after school, all of that, are homeschool children allowed that?
Yes, ma'am, it's after hours. At this time, I'll ask Dr. Lamont Moore to join me as we work through the school designations that have just been released.
All right, good evening again to Board Chair Canty, Dr. Wright, Superintendent, members of this school board. Tonight, we want to provide you with information regarding the school improvement designations that were released very recently to all school districts by the South Carolina Department of Education. We have a very quick slide deck that we're going to go through tonight, but essentially we want to discuss four things, or go over four things. We are going to give you an overview of the process, the general process that the state uses to assign school designations. We want to share with you the schools within our district who have received school improvement designations, discuss the process that the schools must take to exit school designations, and celebrate the progress made by our schools.
Could I ask you, could you give us a definition of school improvement designations for the record?
Yes, so there are 4 different types, and we'll cover that, but it's essentially the state's way of saying, identifying schools that need a certain type of support. And with a lot of these designations, the state will provide funding to schools as well as technical assistance, which could include personnel, transformation coaches that may help provide leadership and guidance to schools as they are working to improve the student performance within their schools. So we'll go through the 4 types in the next slide, and we can go ahead and get started, and then I'll pause for questions. And so on this first slide, you'll see the process. We're going to give you an overview of the process. So as you know, all of our school report cards have ratings and points. And so each school is given a point, point amount for the school. The state will rank all of the schools. The first step in the process is that the state ranks all of the schools and elementary, middle, and high schools based on their total index scores from the report card. Based on the ranking, the schools will fall under one of 4 school improvement designations or possibly no designations at all. The 4 school improvement designations are priority, comprehensive support and improvement, which we'll be referring to as CSI, targeted support and improvement, which is TSI, and additional support and improvement, which is ATSI. So those are the 4 categories of school improvement designations. And like I said, there is a possibility that schools may not fall in any of these designations. You'll also see a reference to subgroups. And of course, I do want to take a moment to explain what that is. We look at the demographic groups across a school, and if there's a group of 20 or more students that fit the same demographic, the state will pull them out as a separate subgroup and compare their performance to the rest of the school as a whole. And so we do have subgroups that are considered. I'm going to just give you some examples of those subgroups that come into play that the state looks at, and it all depends on the makeup of each school. But there's an economically disadvantaged subgroup, there's a students with disabilities subgroup, a white subgroup, African American subgroup, Hispanic subgroup, multilingual learner subgroup, Asian or Pacific Islander, or Native American. So there are a lot of different subgroups. Those are just examples that they look at, and it depends on what the makeup of the population of the school, whether or not these subgroups come into play and need to be looked at even further. So going to the next slide, we're going to look at priority schools first. This designation, after the ranking of all schools is done by the state, the schools listed at the bottom 10% of each grade span are classified as priority schools. So this is the bottom 10% of all schools are considered priority schools. Sumter School District has 4 priority schools, and they are, and you can click that slide again, it'll reveal those. Bates Middle School, Cherryvale Elementary School, Chestnut Oaks Middle School, and Willow Drive. So these 4 schools are considered priority, which when the state ranked all of the schools, these schools fell in the bottom 10% of all schools. In order to exit this designation, if you click the slide one more time, this is a 3-year designation. So the state looks at test scores for over 3 years and determines whether or not that performance triggers a school to be designated as priority. After 3 years, the school must have a report card score that is above the bottom 10%. So after 3 years after receiving this designation, the state will take a second look at these schools, and if these 4 schools have a report card score that's above the bottom 10% of all schools in the state, then they will be removed from that designation as a priority school. The next slide will
Yes.
go to...
Pardon me, Mr. Chair, if I may. What if they do not have a score? that is above that 10%, what happens then?
So they will be re-identified, and so they will experience another 3-year cycle. And these schools do receive funding and support from the state, so the state will provide technical assistance and funding to help schools, and they guide schools in that process, and principals have additional funding from the state to try to do some innovative things to improve within that 3-year cycle.
Does the funding include personnel?
There are parameters that describe that funding, that are put on that funding. In most cases, principals try not, because it becomes a sustainability thing. You know, if you use the money to purchase a reading coach, for example, you have to be able to sustain that after that 3-year cycle, or you could revert. And so principals, those technical assistant meetings, they will guide you as to what's the best way to use, and they usually provide them with some of the best practices that have been done across the nation to use those funds for.
When you say they, does that mean that somebody from the State Department comes in to work with them at that time?
Yes, so the State Department will schedule priority school meetings, and they invite the principal, and sometimes the principal takes leadership team members as well. They meet with these schools, and they provide technical assistance, is what they call it.
I think you just answered my question. This is very helpful here, because I noticed there were some schools on the priority list in Sumter and they're no longer there. And I was wondering what happened to them. So clearly, they are now above the bottom 10%.
Absolutely.
They might not be much improved, but they're improved enough to be beyond the bottom 10%.
Absolutely, and we are going to celebrate those schools at the end of this presentation. But yes, we do have some very great success stories to celebrate today.
Mr. Chair, if I might, one more point here for the clarification of the Board of Trustees, but also our audience in general. Dr. Moore has eloquently stated that once a school is designated as a priority school, it remains as a priority school for 3 years. That is even if school has a bad year or bad testing cycle or what have you. If they get in the bottom 10%, no matter what happens, they can have 10, 15 percentage points of growth. They still remain as a priority designated school for 3 years. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. That's been going on in the state of South Carolina for at least 10 years. And that is something that most of us have angst, because when people do better, in my opinion, they should be rewarded for doing better. And so, but yet we have these designations that stay with us for 3 years, and actually sometimes more, but for the record, it's 3 years.
Exactly. When we received our first designations back in 2018, that was supposed to be 2 years because it was the first cycle of the new accountability system. And with everything that we experienced with COVID, those schools have been on there for 5 years, waiting to be released. So we are excited for those schools that were able to come out of priority. And keep in mind, when we say all schools, it's all schools in that grade span. So elementary, it's stacked up, the middle, they're stacked, and then the high schools, they're stacked.
Don't you all shoot me now. But there's a negative and a positive in this priority school thing, isn't it? Because as long as they're a priority school, they're getting some extra support to make their processes stronger in producing a better student. So there is some good in the bad, as I sort of interpret this. That's a reasonable thought.
Yes, sir. And priority are all schools. When we move on to speak about the CSI and ATSI. CSI is specifically for our Title I schools. So we'll give some more details on those also.
Now, I know we want all of them out. We want every school we got. But while they're in there, at least they are getting enrichment and empowerment through state support and some federal support as well.
That's perfect.
Right, okay.
Our next school improvement designation is our Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools, or CSI. Like Dr. McLeod said, this group looks at Title I schools. This designation focuses on Title I schools. So the elementary and middle schools listed at the bottom 5% of all Title I schools will be classified as CSI. Or any high school with a graduation rate lower than 70% will be classified as CSI. So our school district has 3 CSI schools, and they are Lakewood High School, Pacala Springs Elementary, and R.E. Davis Preparatory Academy. The next slide will talk a little bit about how schools can exit this designation. Again, this is a 3-year cycle. So for elementary and middle schools, their report card score, or WPI, which is weighted point index, has to be above the bottom 5% of all schools, and they have to have a good growth rating, or their identified subgroups performance has to move above all students in the highest performing Title I CSI school in those areas of achievement, preparing success, school climate, and a good growth rating. And those are found on the school report card. One important thing to note, that although these schools are triggered by how they perform as it relates to the bottom 5% of all Title I schools, in order to get out of the designation, they have to be above the bottom 5% of all schools, not all Title I schools, but all schools. So that's a different nuance there that we wanted to bring out. And again, this is after a 3-year cycle.
Could I ask you, both, and so priority schools are receiving support from the State Board of Education, the state experts at the State Department. The kind of information they're being given, is that very similar between the comprehensive support that they're receiving? Is that similar to what they're getting at the priority schools? Or is it a different kind of information? In other words, they're both getting the same information, correct?
Yes, very similar. Since this deals more with the performance of subgroups, I would think that the technical assistance that they receive from the State Department will probably be more tailored to how to reach those subgroups specific to their school. But they also get funding from the state and technical assistance, similar to the priority schools. But it's probably more tailored to their designation.
So it's really the entire district, the teachers are going to be given, most of the teachers are going to be given the same information. I would think that would help us as a district because they're getting the same type of professional development.
And we were experiencing that before COVID occurred. That was the intent. Now, the CSI schools do get a transformation coach. At least last cycle they did. There's about 3 times as many schools on these lists now. And I do not think the pot of funding that the state receives from the federal government is getting larger. So that is going to impact the amount of funding. But the training and the support in the continuous improvement cycle is intended to start with the CSI and then the priority and then the ATSI, so that we're getting the training and the support and we're all speaking the same language.
And speaking of the same language, for everybody, would you tell them what transformation means? That's a technical term. So how would you explain the transformation?
It's transforming what we do.
Okay.
And based on the data to move student achievement forward. So sometimes it looks very different than what we're used to doing. But we start with the root cause analysis. That's the very first thing that we do in the trainings, to really get down to what are the root causes of what we're finding in our data. And it can be very powerful, because once you peel away all of the things that we can't control and get down to what is within our control, and then start really focusing our efforts on those few goals, you start to see a lot of change. And it's positive. And then you see it spreading throughout the buildings. And because we try to support all the schools this way, the hope is that we're going to see it across the school district, sharing what's working in different buildings so that we can all grow.
So I got one question. The root cause, can you give me an example of, because this has been ongoing, of, like for Lakewood High School, what are they doing differently to change their transformation because to improvement? Can you give us an example of what they found, what the root cause of what's going on? For any of the schools, I'm just picking any school out there. Is there anything that comes to mind where they've already figured out what they're doing to try to transform that school to improve?
Well, one of the examples, one of the elementary schools really started to look at their early childhood. Early childhood numbers were low, yet they knew out in their community that they have a lot of young people, and so they started focusing on the early childhood and bringing the students in, using the Child Find resources available so that we can start the learning at an earlier age. And it provides parental supports too, to bring the parents in to help them, because they're the first teachers. They teach before we ever get them. So giving them supports and resources to be able to help the child be ready to get to preschool and kindergarten.
Do you know of, like, is there a list of when they get into the schools to show a list of what they think is the problem, that what they're trying, that we can actually all see? Or do they keep track of that type of stuff like what you just mentioned?
Yes, and you'll see it reflected in the strategic plans or the school renewal plans, the focus on that and what is going to be the first priority versus we can't tackle everything at once, so we have to be very strategic in what's going to make the impact for us and what things can we wait for. Because if we try to fix everything at one time, then you're going in a bunch of different directions. So you're not just like trying to clean a house. You do one room at a time instead of running around the whole house picking up and stuff. So we are focusing on that and the data to support what they're doing in the schools.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a couple questions. I'm just going to throw them at you at once, save some time back and forth. So without seeing the strategic plan and the renewal plan you mentioned, at what point, because 3 years seems to me to be a lagging indication of what, if we implement something now, 3 years from now, that's a long time. One, do we have anything internally that we're looking at to measure these schools and these students' growth outside of that report card from the state? And then two, at what point should we start seeing some of these schools come out of these designations?
Well, some of the things that we are doing, we still have EOCs going on in the high school twice a year. You have data as far as your climate within your school that's being collected. We are implementing common assessments and benchmarks so that we have additional data to drive our curricular needs and identify any gaps that may be there. Also to not to stack teachers against each other, but to look at what's happening in the classroom. If the teacher beside me really did well on linear equations, and my classes didn't, I want to know what they did. How did they present it differently than I did, because I want my students to be successful. So those are the types of things we're looking as we're implementing the common assessments and the benchmarks also, especially at the high schools, because they have more limited data than the elementary and middle schools. However, it's still going to be 3 years. But we do still get a yearly report card for each school, so we will see, but it's still going to have the designation.
We'll see an improvement or.
Correct. Correct.
There's also, if I may, when you track graduation rate, it is simply a number where they look at the amount of children that enter ninth grade as opposed to the amount of children that walk across stage in 12th grade on time. So there are many factors that play into that, including we have to be on top of tracking students when they transition. So if you got a transient population, we have to identify that that child has gone to another school. So we have talked internally about the fact that we believe that we'll benefit from doing a better job of tracking students and where they go. Some of it is going to be, children are going to sometimes make the unfortunate decision to drop out. But a lot of times grad rates are not necessarily reflective if we can't track children to the next designation. So, if I leave and go to a school in Arizona, it is incumbent upon me to verify that that child is now enrolled in a school in Arizona, and then they're dropped off of my roll. So it depends on, unfortunately, it depends on what I do on my end, but it also depends on Arizona properly entering that information for that child to then be dropped. So we've talked about that. We've looked at that as an implementation point to make sure that this information accurately reflects our grad rates.
Just a quick question on that. At what point, so obviously you all have looked at it, the district has looked at it. What sort of numbers, and I know we're unique because of Shaw Air Force Base, totally get it. But what sort of numbers are we looking at where students are being, they're PCS, they're moving or whatever? What sort of numbers, what sort of percentage are we looking at? Is that a 10%? I mean, 'cause that would seem to me very, very high and hard to track at that point.
Yeah.
And so there may be I mean, I don't know about locally, but a process that could, I don't know, that's your area, but what sort of percentages are we looking at as far as like student enrollment who are transient out of the district yearly? Is that something that we track?
Yeah, I would think 10% is probably a low number, Mr. Zell, in terms of transit population, particularly. So we're hit with a couple of things here. Obviously, we have the transit population of the military children, but also sometimes because of COVID and all the challenges that we had with that, children left mama to stay with grandma because grandmama wasn't working. So rural districts particularly were hit hard with that as well. And, certainly not making an excuse, but Lakewood is a rural school. So I bet that if we looked at the data, you would see some of that as well. But also some of it is accounting. I mean, we got to make sure that we are accurately accounting for children when they leave us to go to other places. So.
Correct, and we have been working to make sure that we recover all of our children, but if they are not in that 4-year cohort, they're not going to count in that grad rate. So if a child has come back, and we've had a lot of them, but it's now going to take them another year to earn that diploma, they won't count towards that grad.
They count against you for the purpose of the grad.
CSI schools, high schools, if we put through a couple slides, we're gonna talk about how the high schools exit. One more. So for high schools to exit, they have to have a report card score that's above the bottom 5% of all schools, and they have to have at least a 3% average increase in the college career readiness indicator on their school report cards. Graduation rate over 70%, along with that 3% average increase in college and career indicator, and their identified subgroup performance has to move above all students in the highest performing CSI school for those areas that are listed: achievement, preparing for success, grad rate, and CCR, and school climate.
I just wanted to point out one thing when we're dealing with the high schools. Understand that the achievement for high schools is based on the EOC scores of a cohort. So most of those tests are already in the past. It's hard to go back in time for our soon-to-be graduates and go back to that 9th grade test that they've already taken to make sure that we're performing above those schools. So our high schools, it's going to be, unless the state does something as they're looking at updating the accountability system, our EOCs are already written in stone for this 3-year cycle.
In English goes back to
Ninth
sophomore
grade.
year. It's
Well,
English too.
English 2 goes
Yeah,
to
yeah.
10th grade. Algebra 1's traditionally 9th grade. Yeah, so the tests have been taken. Biology's normally 10th grade.
For algebra, some of your 8th graders take that.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, so that, they have to go back to whatever their 8th grade. That's not right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, improving our graduation rate and our college and career readiness, I think that those indicators, we can really put some effort in, and of course, we want our students moving forward, our EOC scores to continue to improve. However, with the 9GR, the way it's built right now, you're putting the high schools at a disadvantage.
Our next designation is Targeted Support and Improvement Schools, or TSI. This designation is given to schools who have one or more subgroups that perform at or below the bottom 10% of schools across the state for 3 consecutive years, and that will trigger that designation. The state does use a 3-year average that includes the current year and the prior 2-year values in order to determine identification of these consistently underperforming subgroups. So our district has one TSI school, Ocala Springs, and in order for TSI schools to be to exit this designation, if after a year, and this is 1 year, we've been looking at 3-year designations, the TSI designation is for 1 year. If after a year the school's underperforming subgroup performs above the bottom 10%, the school will exit from this designation. This one's slightly different.
Oh. Obviously, you know what the subgroup is. Obviously, the principal knows what the subgroup is. Are you surprised? I mean, is it, for example, is it students from Japan who don't speak English? I mean, is it something that we really cannot have control over? I mean, if,
Most of our subgroup designations are our disabled group, and the State Department is working collaboratively with us first thing that we try to do with our disabled population as much as possible is they are general education students first. They need access to the general education, and then the supports they need are on top of that. So we are looking at continuing to strengthen our Tier 1 instruction and to have the environment where they are least restricted and still able to receive the supports they need. But this is identified as a state problem. And it became very clear when the state data came out that we're trending right with the state.
Because it goes back to the state's philosophy, all students are tested.
Yes, ma'am. And if we do not hit the 95% participation rate at those levels for the testing, then that's an automatic lower grade on the overall report card.
Does that mean that students just don't show up for the test? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's no way to call the parent and see if they can get them up?
Yes, ma'am.
But they still do not show up?
Just for clarity, is that happening? Is that 95%, are we falling under that 95% participation rate?
Our schools are doing remarkably well with that.
So we're not.
This past year, the high schools were the only ones that had an issue, and that was due to when the first semester EOCs were occurring, we were heavily quarantining. So we stretched out the testing until the last minute that the state would allow us, and we ended up around 91, 92%. But it was...
triggered it automatically.
Just a question. Do we have a truant officer?
Well, our coordinator of attendance also serves and handles the truancy and goes to court.
I mean, I can remember the day we had one, and he was very active. So,
Well, I can remember mine, and he made sure I went to school. So that's probably something we need to consider.
All right, our last school improvement designation is the additional targeted support and improvement schools. So next slide, we'll reveal our last group. For this group, these are schools that are classified if they have low-performing subgroups in the school's bottom 5%. So our school district has 7 ATSI schools: Alice Drive Elementary, Crestwood High School, High Hills Elementary, Kingsbury Elementary, Manchester Elementary, Sumter High School, and Wilder Elementary School.
again, can you share with us the subgroup that may be causing issues? I mean, for example, Alice Drive.
Alice Drive is their disabled group. All of them are the disabled group. There are a couple more that have a poverty group, or there's no ML groups this time. Main is the disabled. Every one of those is disabled.
Mr. Chair, if you don't mind me asking, just for, to follow up at Ms. Disney's question, can you define what disabled is? Because when I hear disabled, I'm thinking wheelchair, I'm thinking things like that. Is ADHD, attention issues, things like that, are they categorized in this disabled group?
It's normally if they have a learning disability of some kind that has been documented. For better clarification on that, though, I would defer to Ms. Davis, who that's part of her support.
She's over there to your left.
So yes, to answer your question, a student with ADD could also qualify as a student with a disability under the umbrella of IDA, they have an IDA.
I mean, this isn't, we're not talking about anyone, any child or student specifically, but is there data that you could present to us at some point to kind of give us, paint us a more broader picture of what we're dealing with as a school district? Because I think this is a very good topical presentation, but it doesn't tell us the nuts and bolts. And that's kind of, I think, that what we really should be getting at.
I agree with that, is basically, because what you're saying is because of the disabled category, all these schools right here should be off this list if we can get our hands around that situation, that category. So like my question is, what's the percentage in the district as a whole are we looking at? How many kids are we looking at? And that goes along with your question is, well, how many students fall into this category?
The last time I looked at the number, it was right over 3,000. And that has fallen a little bit over the years, but I can verify the exact number.
And let me ask you, if a child is on an IEP, it doesn't mean that that child is considered disabled, right? But are there those who have an IEP who fall outside of that category? Or is it automatic, an IEP means they're disabled?
My understanding is they're pulling a report from Enrich, and a student with an IEP is considered a student with disability. Yes. So there's no student outside of that exception.
In most ways of assessing the data for the purpose of accountability, it's a category called SWD nationwide, so students with disabilities, which encompasses a few physical disabilities, but basically is designated based on learning disabilities. So special needs students with disabilities would be under the category that we're discussing at this point.
My understanding, for testing purposes, a student with an IEP has special testing accommodations.
That's correct.
And doesn't that seem to help the scores?
It does, but through Dr. collaboration, we started collaborating even more last year. It goes back to what she said about tier 1. The students need that access to the curriculum, and that's the area that we are really focusing on to make sure they get that access to the curriculum, and then we provide that supplemental support and services.
Could an IEP also be written for a child who does not speak English as a first language?
It could, but the evaluation process would probably not allow that as a first option for that reason. We'd have to rule out a lot of factors, including we probably would have to give that student that evaluation in native language before we move to that student being considered a student with disability.
And to be clear, accommodations most of the time are not designed to make the test easier or more palatable. Generally, accommodations deal with the amount of questions that are given or the way that questions are delivered more so than, special needs students with disabilities are still required to take tests that involve the same content as regular ed students, despite their disabilities. It's just a regular ed test might have 20 questions on it, and the modified test may have 10, just as an example. So I want to be clear about it. Test is not easier for a child with disabilities to pass the test.
For example, if a child has dyslexia, could a test person helping him read the the reading part?
If they qualify for that as an accommodation at IEP, and so they would also get that accommodation on their state testing as well.
Right.
But they have to use that accommodation in their classroom in order to get on the test.
Okay.
So the exit criteria for ATSI schools. The identified subgroups, their performance has to move above all students' average in that bottom 5% of the highest performing Title I schools identified for CSI for achievement and growth. So that's how elementary and middle schools exit. If we go to the next slide, it'll talk a little bit about how high schools can exit this designation. The identified subgroup performance must move above all students' average performance in the bottom 5% of the highest performing Title I CSI high schools in achievement, which again is the end of course, and college and career readiness. So those are our 4 designations. The next slide will show you all of them together. Just as a recap, we have 4 school improvement designations, and our district has 4 priority schools, 3 CSI schools, 1 TSI school, and 7 ATSI schools. And we're going to finish this with some celebrations. So the next slide will reveal some things that we've noticed as we compared our school's performance to their performance in 2018 and 2021. So one of the first things we want to recognize is our ELA proficiency is higher than it was in 2021 at 18 out of 19 of our elementary and middle schools. So when looking at all of the elementary and middle schools, when we looked at ELA proficiency for 2022, it was higher than it was in 2021. Our math proficiency is higher than it was in 2021 at 18 out of 19 of our elementary and middle schools. Science proficiency is higher than it was in 2021 at 9 out of 19 of our elementary schools. Biology proficiency is up from 2021 at all 3 high schools. Our college and career readiness is up from 2021 at 2 out of 3 of our high schools. Specifically, Croswell Drive Elementary, Furman Middle School exited the priority status that was given to them in 2018. So we did have some schools that exited that priority school improvement designation. And specifically, Hillcrest Middle School, Rafting Creek Elementary School, Croswell Drive, and Lamira Elementary School have no school improvement designations. And we had schools that also improved in their points and ratings when we compared this year's report card to the former year. So we have quite a few points of celebration that our principals are aware of and that they're celebrating with their schools and the teachers and students. And we have a lot to be proud of because we are seeing the results, even in just 1 year, in our proficiency as well as our college and career readiness. So with that, we do want to celebrate the work of our students and our teachers and principals in our district, in our schools. So I'm going to pause there to see if we have any questions.
I really thank you for this information. It is enlightening. A question on the side regarding instruction. If we had more interventionists in the elementary schools, particularly who could help with the IEP students, would that be helpful in helping us to pull up some ratings here?
That would be helpful, but I think our first line of defense is going to be, our offense, depending on how you look at it, is going to be that Tier 1 instruction, what everyone's doing in the classrooms, and we have got to shore up our teaching staff. As
Okay.
long as it is, we are struggling to have teachers in the classrooms, it's going to be hard to move some of these scores.
But what you're saying is, if you do not have a classroom certified, qualified classroom teacher, and just somebody letting them work on a Chromebook,
Right,
that's not going to help.
right. That would be number one
Yes.
for me.
Uh-huh.
And then, yes, absolutely, highly qualified interventionists would be very useful because we use those interventions for all students. And as we said, they're all general education students first, and then the resources, other resources that are needed for whatever the learning disability is. are in addition after they've received everything that any of our struggling students would need.
And just a point, our ELA scores were up, but we have new standards for next year.
Yes, ma'am, and we're already starting that work right now.
I have one more question. The schools that have no improvement designations that are, it's working, the ones that have come off the list, these things have been implemented, are we sharing that knowledge base with the schools that need it? Is there information sharing as far, hey, this is working, we need to look at it over here?
Yes, ma'am, we are doing that. And we are encouraging sharing across the school grade spans, and not only that, the teachers also. It should be an honor if you have a teacher that's really performing, if someone else says, hey, can I send one of my teachers to see what she's doing or he's doing, that we might be able to replicate. So we're definitely encouraging that. And our focus of our principals meetings, they're really not meetings anymore, they are trainings every month. And we are looking at the data every month and the most current data to drive the decisions we're making for the classrooms.
Just a couple of observations. One is I kind of jump on what you were saying, especially with the EOCs. We had those great 100%, and even from the last ones with the science, there were certain department head that I've noticed that was racking up how many of his students were getting 100%. So my biggest thing is I hope that's what you're doing, is you're tapping and calling those people up and saying what they're doing for 100% on the EOCs.
Absolutely.
The other thing I want to bring up is, remember, we're going against everybody in the state, okay? So we're all in a situation with teachers not having, and we're still at the bottom. I'm going to be real. I'm a realistic type person, you know. So they're all in the same situation, and we really need to pull ourselves out of this. And again, with the behavioralist, the interventionist is going to be a big plus, but keep in mind is there's got to be the root cause. This is what you mentioned that we need to be looking at, because we're all in the same boat. The whole state's in the same boat. So there's got to be something specific to here in our school district that we really need to look at, because it's something different than the other schools that are out there. So that's where I was trying to get to, is what is our particular root cause, what's going on, that we really need to attack and go after. That is my biggest thing, is what we need to get accomplished, because we're all in the same boat. And so I can't really go off of just because we have low manning on teachers. That's not the answer to this whole thing. We got to do the hand that we're dealt with. So.
Okay. I'll now say thank you to the three of you. You started off with two, ended up with three.
It's always a team effort.
There are some other questions, but we'll hold them to the next time. Thank you very much.
At this time, for item 7.3, like to have Dr. Shirley Gamble and Mr. Samuel Myers come forth to present item 7.3.
Good evening. This evening, Dr. Gamble and I will cover some areas in reference to code of conduct. We'll start with that segment of it. I must say that at the beginning of the time that Dr. Wright came on board, he immediately started talking about some of the things that he had experienced in the time that he had worked as principal, assistant principal, and as superintendent. One of the most important pieces was conduct of students in the schools. We looked at that very specifically, and right from the start, we started looking at some of the things that could enhance the performance of children and giving teachers opportunities to do some things as well. When we look at the discipline data and the disaggregation of that, we found that some of that was skewed, and so we had to share that information, compile that information, and share that with principals and assistant principals so that they could see it and work with it in depth. At this point, Dr. Gamble is going to walk us through the pieces of the discipline code of conduct at this time. Dr. Gamble.
Good evening as well to our board and Dr. Wright. Thank you for this opportunity to share some information regarding our code of conduct revisions. And right now we are in the process of having monthly meetings to try to address the issues that we're having with our code of conduct. I gave you some data looking at the first 100 days of school, and that ended on January the 30th of 2023. And I just did a summary of the top 5 discipline infractions with the highest numbers in our district. And what you see on the screen is actually in alphabetical order, but the number you see in parentheses represents the actual rank of that information. We'll see that cutting class actually is the #1 offense in Sumter School District. And number 2 is refusal to obey, defiant. Number 3 being bus violations, 4 fighting, and 5 hit, kick, push. And Mr. Myers mentioned earlier that some of the data is slightly skewed, and I would say that when it comes to fighting, for instance, when our school personnel are entering that data, if they don't enter it correctly, it will have a higher increase what appears to be incidents. What school personnel must do, if there is a infraction where there is a fight, and it could be with 2 or more individuals, there should be only 1 incident number. We would certainly put in all the participants in that fight, but under 1 number. What we have found that schools were doing was they were entering each name separately under a different incident number. So if indeed there were, say, 3 or 4 people fighting, they were getting 4 incident numbers. So that's why we know that data is skewed. We're working with our schools now to make sure that they go in and correct that data so that we will have a more meaningful data analysis when we're looking at the data. So it will be more reflective of what's going on in our schools, and also will help us to identify those trends and to make some informed decision-making of what we need to do to improve what's going on in our schools to maintain order. So, Scott? So I just thought I would disaggregate a little further for you to let you see what's going on at the levels when it comes to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. As you can see, in elementary school, the #1 violation is actually bus violations. And when you look at the middle school, it's refusal to obey. High school, cutting class. Number 2 is hit, kick, push again in elementary school, but it's fighting in middle school and tardies in high school. And of course, you can read the rest of the list, but I wanted just to point out to you that by the time our students get to high school, it is the physical altercations are declining somewhat. And as I said, I do know that our data right now is not reflective of our schools. I've even speaking with schools today, still looking at their data and can find still some errors. So those schools are correcting that. So what we're doing under the guidance of Dr. Wright, we have formed a discipline committee to review that code of conduct. As you can see, we have noted that there are 31 members. I've listed the composition of those members to show you that it is a diverse group, and we want to make sure that all levels are represented. Also, when it comes to teachers, actually there are like 2 elementary, 2 middle, 2 high school. Our principals are basically the same. We have district office personnel, assistant principals, and we do have a Shaw representative as well. So we began that and notified our committee members on the 11th. We also sent them the administrative rule which is ARJICDA-R, because we wanted them to review this before they came to our first meeting, so they would have some input to what they believe would be the issue with our code of conduct when it comes to the administrative rule. On January the 19th, we had our first meeting. There we established what we wanted to accomplish to ensure that we have positive and productive learning environments. Also, we talked with those participants regarding the fact that certainly we want to ensure that we have a code of conduct that would manage our student behaviors, but at the same time, it cannot be so punitive that we are not willing to help our young people grow to be productive citizens. Because we must be mindful that punishment alone does not change behaviors for all students. So we must have some interventions in place as well, such as certainly we're going to meet with parents on every infraction. We want to have guidance counselors in. You mentioned earlier about behavioral interventionists. We want to also use personnel to help us in that regard. But out of those 31 members, we have formed 2 subcommittees. One subcommittee will look at category 1, which is considered our disorderly conduct offenses. And the second subcommittee is actually looking at 2 categories, which is category 2 and category 3. And the reason that they have 2, because in category 3, those are considered criminal conduct offenses, and there are very few changes that can be made to that particular category. And for the few that are, then we are looking at those to see if we need to move those from that category. And so after that meeting, we sent some more information to our committee members. That's on the 1st of February. We gave them, again, another copy of the administrative rule. We gave them a sample of a code of conduct that from a neighboring district, and also a matrix for them to start putting their ideas in for us to be able to come back and discuss at our next meeting.
Which neighboring district?
We looked at Darlington's because it's a very simple document the way it's laid out, and also it does not have as many administrative actions as our current code of conduct.
Quick question, if you don't mind me asking, Mr. Chair, what do you consider administrative actions? Is that steps in the process of reporting, or is that actual consequences to behavior?
It's the consequences to the behavior. So at our second meeting, which is February the 2nd, we continued the review of the categories, and there were some recommendations regarding behavior codes and recommendations to change some of the administrative actions. Because in some of the categories, especially for our older students, some of our committee members felt that we were giving them too many opportunities to misbehave before consequences became a little more punitive for their conduct. And we were scheduled to meet on the 16th, but unfortunately we were unable to do so. So our next meeting is going to be March 9th, and we will continue that work as well as look at the behavior code definitions. We want to ensure that we are using the same common language when from school to school, and our plan is for schools to be more consistent when it comes to the behaviors. We want our schools to basically give the same consequence across our school district. Of course, we do know that sometimes there has to be some flexibility based upon the situation and circumstances, but we do want to become more consistent across our district. So that was a quick review of the code of conduct. The work that we're working now is ongoing. So are there any questions related to that?
I have a question,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
What system are you all using to do the reporting for the discipline referrals? Is it the ABS system still, or?
Yes, it continues to be ABE, also known as scholarship.
Okay.
Sorry, what's ABE?
Is it administrative behavior educator, I think. Is it?
Okay. Mr. Chair, quick question. When should we see a final draft before it's presented to the board? What's the timeline y'all expect? I mean, this isn't to push. We need to do it right and do it fast, rather than do it fast. But at what point should we expect to see some sort of draft document presented to the board?
Our goal is actually to have a draft for our next principals meeting, which it will be the middle of March. And shortly thereafter, we should have something for you, because we'd like for our principals to look at it as well as a whole, for them to determine if additional changes need to be made before we present it to you.
Mr. Chair, I got a couple of questions. You said that you're looking at Darlington's one of them. I know, Dr. Wright, you mentioned that we need to start looking at it as a bigger school district. Darlington, to me, is not even close to what we're looking for. My suggestion is, and I'll give you this today, I've made these up, Fort Mill is an outstanding code of conduct. It breaks it down and it makes it equal across the board. And I'll definitely give you this because I highly suggest you take a look at Fort Mill. They're very similar to us, even maybe a little larger, but it breaks down to everything, like you said, mitigation, Saturday school. Why aren't we looking at Saturday schools? Why aren't we looking after, after school detentions? Really, because I seen Darlington's code of conduct and be polite, and it's not good. It's not good at all. Actually, if you just go ahead and look at something with Fort Mill, and it really gives them breakdown to the point where if you're caught smoking, that the sheriff department can actually cite you. And that's what needs to do, is start enforcing the standards out there. The other thing I would like to suggest is, like the priorities, I like to see the numbers, not just 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and actually the actual numbers that are, what happened. Because just ranking doesn't really show the actual problems for myself. I just like to see the numbers out there. And then, like I said, is we definitely need to start seeing a rough draft in March. We as a board need to have this finalized in July, and so it can get printed out and actually. So, I know we want to do it right, and we definitely, but we need to start putting teeth into this. Thank you.
Okay, at this juncture, we're going to shift gears. Another portion of the request that you had made was your concerns about the arrival times and the departures of our buses and with our children being transported to and from schools and the amount of time that it takes to get them there. I must say that the information that we have compiled, this information is very fluid. It shifts on any given day. This was the final compilation that we did from last week, so it changes from time to time. And one thing that I will say, when we talk about arrival times, with our elementary schools, we have a better percentage of arrivals, with 87% of those buses arriving at that time, and our late arrivals being about 13%. And with the information that you've received, one thing that we have to make sure we understand, and that is, if an elementary school takes in at 7 a.m., the bus may arrive at 7:05 or 7:10. Instruction doesn't start until 7:15 or 7:30. So technically, you might say because the school takes in at 7 and they get there at 7:05, 7:10, that's pretty good because instruction has not started. And we have to keep that in mind as we're moving along. As we move over to the middle schools, well, let me shift back to our elementary departure in the afternoon. We're right about 47% of those that are on time. We also have to keep in mind that the 53% of those late departures will come from our drivers having to run 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 different routes, as we shared with you during the presentation some time ago. And as we move on to our middle schools, on-time arrivals are 41%, and our late arrivals are about 59%. Once again, it changes because a driver may be out. You may have 2 drivers that might call in and say, I can't make it to work. That means that our drivers are going to have to pick up 2 to 3 or 4 different routes than what they did. They established from the beginning. Our on-time departures, a little bit better, 59%, but we're still having to run those routes. And when we see that one bus is getting within 25 minutes of the dismissal time, or we have 2 buses buses getting within 45 minutes of that time. We just have to keep in mind that the drivers are doing the very best that they can to get them there. Let's move on to the high school, where we have on-time arrivals about 68%, and our late arrivals about 32%. 7 buses coming within 15 minutes of the start time, 1 bus coming within 20 minutes, and so forth. As we go on to the on-time departures, a lot of the buses are already on the yard when school dismisses. High school is dismissed at 3:45. If you're going to say that a bus is late because they're not there at 3:45, by the time all of the students exit the building at 3:45, they get on the buses about 3:50, 3:55, and the buses can pull out about 4 o'clock. So technically, those buses are on time. That's why you have that 59% with the other buses, 1 that comes within 30 minutes, 2 within 45 minutes, and so forth. So as I stated in the onset, this is very fluid. It changes on a regular basis, and we do the very best that we can to get them to school and be there in the afternoon to get them home.
I'm not being critical, but I am concerned about students. And I taught high school, so I know first period comes, it's my job to make sure they can pass all those tests. So you have a bus that comes within 40 minutes. How many kids are on that bus?
It varies,
Well, just give me a number. That's more than 2, right?
maybe 30.
All right, that's a classroom set. All right, and then another bus comes rolling up 55 minutes late. How many kids could be on that bus?
Maybe
That-
about the same.
Okay, so what I'm saying to you, we're looking at 2 classrooms where kids are missing out. They missed all my instruction, I can tell you that. And so when that kid receives a failing grade on my test and on the state test, the EOC, I failed that kid. Sumter School District failed that kid. I never would blame the bus drivers doing the best he can. But somebody has failed those kids. I'm sorry. It's not just numbers of a bus. It's not just minutes. It's a child's future. And I don't know what to do about it. But I want us to know we're not talking about numbers and buses. We're talking about human lives, kids who want to do well, who want to go to college, or who want a career. I don't know what to do about it.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you,
I
Ms.
don't know.
Disney, is a lot of times I've been in the federal government and we get, where we don't have enough bodies and we're just dealt with the hand that we got. So my question to you is, you're dealt with this. What solutions, and because you are the people that can come up with the solution to think outside of the box, that we can actually, and Dr. Wright, same thing, is think outside the box. Can we have an on-call people in the district that are already trained and they can say, hey, jump out there, get onto the bus and get going, so we don't have to wait for another school bus driver to come in or get done. My biggest question is, what you have, what type of solutions that you can come up, and it may not be great, but it's something that we can try to get these people, these children to school. And maybe not the greatest decision, but something to at least get us a bridge to get our children on time, or closer than almost 2 hours or an hour and a half.
Or let's just don't offer English 1, algebra, or science first period. We can't get the kids to school. Let's don't offer those classes. Give them PE. I don't know. I'm not being critical. I know you hate me. just
I
don't-
agree
I know there's
with Ms.
something we can
Disney.
do, but I see these as children, not as numbers.
I agree with Ms. Disney, and again, We have a bus driver shortage, we know that. We have a teacher shortage, we know that. And we're trying to come up with ways that we can address that. However, and you look at the, I mean, if a kid does not learn in elementary school how to read, we're going to have problems from here on out. And if you're looking at 2 buses that are arriving 45 and 60 minutes late, how many children is that? We're talking about 60, 70 kids maybe. It's impactful on their lives and their education. So again, thinking outside the box about what classes we offer until we can rectify the root problem. Maybe, think about how we're structuring our instruction day to come out with something to where there's not something of reading, writing, arithmetic kind of thing in that first period, because all of these kids are missing first period. Every single child that is on any of these buses, they're missing their first period, and some of them may be into the second one. And so unless you have a highly motivated student, which I had this conversation talking to a child who goes to Sumter High. She gets to school 40 minutes late to her first class, which is accounting. Now, she is highly motivated, and she has made arrangements to where she gets what she needs, and she's a straight A student. But not all children are that motivated, and all children need to have access. You understand what I'm saying? So yeah, we need to look outside of the initial thing, which is we need more bus drivers so that all the routes happen at the same time. Okay, we're heading there. But address what now, because the kids are falling off the bus, pardon the pun, today. So I really think we need to look at creative ways to address that first period.
So, okay, so this what I heard both sides of, what you said, and I heard what you said. From last time we talked, we are short of bus drivers. We do know that we're short of bus drivers. At this point, I kind of disagree with their saying change the schedules from English when that's impossible.
That was just a joke.
Yeah, it's impossible. And it varies. So it may be bus 5 late today. Tomorrow it may be bus 10. So it varies with the kids. My thing is we have to find the root to the situation. The situation is we short of bus drivers. We need to get funds to pay these bus drivers, increase these bus drivers' pay, increase the teachers' pay, to get more bus drivers. That's it. We can't sit here and poke at the situation saying, oh, maybe this right here work, this right here. No, we need more bus drivers. So it doesn't matter how we address them or how they bring this information. They brought some similar information last time. We're still at the same spot. So my thing is, let's talk about what we're going to do to get more bus drivers. Not continue to dwell on we short or dwell on the kids getting to school on time if we're not going to do anything about it. Of course, they're going to be late tomorrow. They're going to be late next week as well until we get more bus drivers set in place.
Mr. Chairman, just quick, may I make a suggestion that we establish a special type committee for transportation specifically on the board and give us some access to work with the district to see what we can do and uncover and help them within that endeavor? I think this is such a big issue of which we know it's a problem that starts a ripple effect through the day, through the months, through the entire calendar year, school year. If this is something we don't get a hold of and quick, we're not going to see the fruits of the potential increase of EOC scores and everything else. It's certainly part of the equation. So I would just like to make a suggestion to maybe establish a special type committee to do so.
If I recall correctly, Sean, you may be able to help me with this. Didn't we have at one time an ad hoc committee on transportation?
Yes, sir. Under your administration a couple of years ago, you assigned an ad hoc committee. Yes, sir.
And maybe, And I think you're right. I think you're right. Give us a minute to think through that, and we'll get it worked out, okay?
Mr. Chair, if I might offer a couple of points of, first of all, I want to be clear about the fact that many of the things that are suggested tonight we're already doing. We have alternative personnel that are already helping us with routes, teachers, coaches, paraprofessionals, a little bit of everybody. The bottom line solution to this problem, and also additionally, districts that have transportation shortages generally stagger operation schedules. So they'll have elementary schools starting at one time, middle at a different time, high school. So, I think Mr. Myers might remember I asked all those questions when I first got here, and we've kind of checked those boxes. So, while we are always looking for alternatives in terms of how to problem solve this and any other solution, the bottom line now is that we've got to have more people doing the work of driving buses, period. However we get them, where we get them from, that's really the bottom line, which is going to include, yes, it's going to include more pay, but we just got to get more people interested in our profession, the work that we do on a daily basis. And unfortunately, that includes bus driving. It used not to. We had teacher shortages in rural districts for years. Well, now, bus driver salaries, bus driver environments are competing with working at McDonald's, emptying baskets of fries. So we've got to get serious about the profession and recruiting people. And right now, it is a competitive disadvantage for us to be able to go out and recruit and retain. So as they used to say in the church house, we need each one to reach one. I mean, that's really how we're going to solve the problem. We've got to have more people that we can train and get on these buses. And until we do that, we're going to have these same, unfortunately, we're going to have these same problems. Now, we're going to continue to look at the way we deliver instruction. Great suggestion. We may be able to look at when we offer certain classes. I mean, that's all a part of growing and getting better. But the bottom line is we got to have more people operating our buses, period, however we get them. So just want to be clear about that.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Mr. Myers, I wish I could get around saying what I just got to say. We've come a long way from your last presentation when there were no late buses to documented late buses today. It's critically important that staff people be honest with this board. Staff at every level. We were not given the right information the last time you and another member of transportation came. It was not you, but we were not given the right information. This is not the model we want in this district. It is better to know the truth and deal with the truth than to be told something that is not true and we live in a false world. That is not why we are here. I regret very much that that occurred that night, and others have occurred on other evenings here in the short few weeks since we've been meeting. And it's time that we get a stop of that. If you can't tell us the truth, tell us you'll give us a report later. Just don't give us anything. I do realize it's a task. We've got to work on it, because there are certain buses that are late every day. It's the same students every day at certain schools every day, missing the same classes every day. This is not fair to the kids. They cannot get the education they need. They cannot score well on PASS and other exams if they are not in the classroom getting the information. So we've got to work on it. We've got to be very creative about it. And so I will ask you, sir, to please work with the superintendent and with the staff and do whatever you guys can do to remedy this problem, because it's major. It's major. And with that said, I want to thank the two of you, Dr. Gamble and Mr. Myers, for your reports tonight. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Trustees, at this time we'll have items 7.4 and 7.5 from Mrs. Shatika Spearman, our Chief Finance Officer.
Good evening, board members. I sit before you to present two items. The first item being the fiscal year 2024 budget timeline. I have provided this as far as the development of budget and the review of budget. Just so that you know, we have currently had the first item pretty much completed to determine our standard staffing sizes with a district formula that we utilize. And so we will continue to meet to stabilize those numbers, and then we'll ask for the principal's input on what they need. So that's where we are currently, and then this timeline tells you where we want to end up. And in a perfect world, June 2023, we shall have our 2024 budget.
I just want to jump on that. This is exactly how we like, I think as a board, Mr. Chair, is for any type of situation coming up to the board is to have a timeline like this so we know exactly where we're at. So I appreciate, because this is outstanding, and we, especially as a finance committee and the chair, this helps a lot. So thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, quick, I just want to say thank you. I'm also on the Finance Committee, so I'm very much looking forward to working with you on this and you teaching us, new board members, the process. So please don't get too frustrated when I ask a lot of questions.
No, that'll help me.
Okay, good. So in the light of asking questions, I just have a handful of them I would like to present to you. They're real basic. Does this timeline, is this kind of a typical timeline for fiscal year budgeting? Is this what we tend to use? Is this any significant changes from previous timeline?
Well, from my past experience at another district, this is similar. The point of this is to get the input from the principals who are on the ground.
Okay.
And so to get that information is critical so that we can have a realistic budget.
Sure.
So for that ingredient, that point alone, this is very critical.
All
This
right.
is standard.
And if last question, it's an easy one, but you being relatively new to the district, do you see any major limiting factors getting in the way of meeting this timeline?
Well,
Other than a couple new board members getting in your way?
Oh, no. No, you all will be very helpful. So the only thing, of course, is the revenue projection lines, what the state projects, any effects of our numbers decreasing. Those are the things that would be a concern.
Okay, sure. Outside of our realm, coming from state. Okay,
Correct.
perfect. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Does that include ESSER?
Well,
As you sunset?
right. ESSER is its own life, but there are some things in ESSER that we have started that we want to sustain, and we have to come up with a sustainability plan for those things. That would be the effect of that.
I guess, a follow-up to that question, do we have anything pending? Are we working on anything now within the district to establish that kind of sustainment plan for these funds?
Well, we were going to use this budget process to see what those items are.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
what
Perfect.
we'll do.
Perfect.
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. ESSER is through 24, am I correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Yes, ma'am. And my final item to present is the current capital projects update. This report, although very lengthy in number of pages, is done by the locations in our school district and those things that are outstanding. If you look in the encumbrances part, that tells you what's also outstanding. For any items that have no year-to-date or current period, those are projects that we are trying to start, and they have not been initiated. But we have very many projects going on at the same time. And of course, these funds are the capital projects funds that we get from the bond issuance that we do in the fall and the spring. And so this report here does not include those ESSER-related projects. So there's even more than this. But just the capital projects fund monies and activities, that's what this represents. And normally in your facilities meetings, that's where you get down into the detail of some detailed information regarding these projects.
Mr. Chair, I got a couple questions, and partly this could be the facility meeting. Just a couple of line items that I noticed. Walkie-talkie, 0% spent, 385,000. Is that?
I can get a status.
Okay, so some of these, and there's a couple of other ones. 1.4 million, I believe it's 1.4, I think, for student Chromebooks, because we're not spent, we're only at 0%. The other question was, why is there two line items? And this is something that for student Chromebooks. Is there a reason for the two line items? Yeah, I noticed on the budget.
I will get an answer for that and give you a written response.
Okay, I just want to know what's the difference in the two. Or is it a duplicate? I'm hoping not. So, and still with I noticed with the GPS for the buses and all that, what's the status of activation, and that could be a facility, more or less facility. And then, last one, the school security, 94,000. What does that entail? Do you know? No, because that's at 0% interest, or spent.
Okay. All right. I will get those items in detail too. Any other questions?
Questions for Lady Spelman? Anything else, Mr. President?
No, sir, I think we're okay. We can get those responses out to the entire board very shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate you. All right.
Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Trustees, that concludes the superintendent's report for February 27, 2023.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Anyone have any questions for the superintendent?
No, sir, I just want to say thank you. These detailed reports, I think it's if we're going to get after problems, we've got to know the details, we've got to know the nuts and bolts, and so I just want to say personally thank you for your team presenting us that information. So it's setting the expectation pretty high, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for saying that, and I do want the Board of Trustees to hear from me that my team works extremely hard to make sure that we're prepared, and there is a ton of work that goes into preparing this documentation to make sure that the data is correct for you all, and we will continue to make sure that what we present to you is accurate and timely. There might be occasion where we might have to come to you and say, we'll get it to you, but we might need a little more time. So I just want us to keep that in mind, but we're going to do our best to provide you information and be transparent with what we do. Thank you.
Okay? Anyone else? If not, we'll move to item 8, executive session.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to go into executive session. Motion to enter into executive session for monthly personnel report, appointment, compensation, promotion, demotion, discipline, termination, and release of an employee, and discuss safety plans and drills update.
So the motion is supported. Is there any discussion? Okay. All right. Let's see. All right. Yeah. Please vote your pleasure. All right, it's a unanimous decision. Ladies and gentlemen, we will enter into executive session twice for this evening. Thank you for coming. We will not be long, but if you cannot stay, we understand. We appreciate your actions required.
Mr. Chair, we have two tonight. We do not have any items under 10.1. 10.2 is the monthly personnel report, and I am recommending approval of the personnel report at this time.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, I make the motion to approve the personnel report as presented for February 27th, 2023.
I second the motion.
Motion has been made and supported to receive and adopt the superintendent's personnel report. All right, would you please vote your choice?
Vote passes unanimously.
All right, it's a unanimous vote. Carried.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, 10.3 is the third and final reading to amend board policy ARBDR, organization of the school board.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to amend board policy ARBD-R, organization of the school board, and add the position of parliamentarian.
I second.
Motion is supported. You're in favor of the motion, you'll vote aye. If you are opposed, you'll vote nay. If you're neither, you'll abstain. Thank you very much.
Vote passes.
Vote passes. All right. We're down to the consent agenda. Is there any objection to the consent agenda? Once, twice, 3 times, it's adopted. Of course, ladies and gentlemen, adjournment is also by consensus. Is there anyone in here who disagrees with adjournment? Good night.